Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, May 1st, 2025, episode 376, and we're going to talk about May Day. So, May Day was originally a European celebration of the return of spring. But in Britannica.com, it has become a day to commemorate, that is, remember and honor the historic struggles and gains made by workers and the labor movement observed in many countries on May 1st. It's not really a big deal in the United States because we have Labor Day, the first Monday of September. So, the history of May Day. In 1889, an international federation of socialist groups and trade unions designated May 1st as a way to support workers. In commemoration of the Haymarket riot in Chicago 5 years later, President Grover Cleveland, uneasy with the socialist origins of Workers' Day, signed a legislation to make Labor Day, already held in some states on the first Monday of September, the official U.S. holiday in honor of workers. Canada followed suit not long afterward. In the Soviet Union, this is all from Britannica.com. In the Soviet Union, leaders embraced the new holiday, believing it would encourage workers in Europe and the United States to unite against capitalism. The day became a significant holiday in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc countries. And I have an episode on American exceptionalism and why socialism just didn't take as easily and quickly as it did in other countries. Moving on. Haymarket Affair, and it was mentioned earlier, was a violent confrontation between police and labor protesters in Chicago, May 4th, 1886. And that became a symbol of the international struggle for workers' rights. It has been associated with May Day, which is May 1st, since that day's designation as International Workers' Day. And this is what happened in the Haymarket affair slash riot. So on May 3rd, a person was killed and several injured as police intervened to protect strikebreakers and intimidate strikers during a union action at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company. That was part of a national campaign to secure an 8-hour workday. Let's see. To protest the police brutality, anarchist labor leaders called a mass meeting the next day in Haymarket Square. That gathering was pronounced peaceful by Chicago Mayor Carter Harrison, who attended as an observer. After Harrison and most of the demonstrators departed, a contingent of police arrived and demanded that the crowd disperse. At that point, a bomb was thrown by an individual never positively identified, and the police responded with random gunfire. 7 police officers were killed and 60 others wounded before the violence ended. Civilian casualties have been estimated at 4 to 8 dead and 30 to 40 injured. So a lot more police on the losing side of that. The Haymarket Affair created widespread hysteria directed against immigrants and labor leaders. A lot of leaders, I think 8 of them were tried and executed by hanging in 1887. Some people said that it was what do they call that? A hung jury or a packed jury, a jury that was filled with people who were biased against these labor leaders, and the judge himself also was biased, and so that led to the execution of those 8. Now, so that's May Day, right? Workers' Rights Day, and it sounds interesting, right? Maybe you don't know how to come down on the riot itself, but the fact that workers were fighting for rights might garner some empathy, sympathy from listeners or people who are reading it in passing. It was just really interesting to me also because we in the our eighth grade class, we talked about the Haymarket Affair and how it led to uh, the downfall of the Knights of Labor, which was at the time the largest union in the country. Since it was connected with the Haymarket Affair, it basically began a decline, and we don't hear about it too much any longer, and led to the rise of the American Federation of Labor, which focused more on each individual occupation separately, as opposed to the Knights of Labor, which was more true to communism and tried to unite all workers under the same umbrella. Clearly, the American Federation of Labor was much more successful, primarily because you are now able to hide the contradiction in all of the competing labor interests, right? So I talk about this competition among different groups of workers in episode 310, um, and that was addressing Jimmy Dore's remarks regarding workers. And so he is talking about certain kind of workers. He was basically lamenting how workers' rights were being trampled. But what he and a lot of other people like him, I mean, I get what he's saying, but what he is subjectively neglecting is that those workers' rights that he's advocating for come at the expense of other workers. So here's the thing. You claim, like people who have this subjectivity, have this mindset, they claim that they are workers' rights, right? They're pro workers' rights. They're fighting for the workers, but not all workers, only some workers, the workers that they know, not personally, but the ones that they're familiar with. And forget about all of the other workers who are coming into the country who need jobs or in other countries. Who cares about them, right? So it's a very biased, racialized um, form of advocacy, right? And I have maintained in that episode and in other episodes that the best protection for the worker is job mobility. I've talked about that, uh, especially when I talk about the free market. And so in a healthy economy, being able to find a better job with better pay and better benefits should be easy, right? Everyone is competing for better jobs, which basically means that employers are going to try to lure better workers to work for them. And so they're going to offer better wages, better benefits, better working conditions, better uh, number of hours that you need to work, better vacation packages, medical plans, etc., the whole nine yards, right? And so the union actually works against the uh, the interests of the workers by trapping workers at the same job, right? Because once you leave the union, then you got to start all over to begin your retirement. And if you get bored of your job, if you get sick of your job, too bad, you got to stay, right? And they convince you to stay. They tie you to the job through the health plan or other conditions and benefits that are tied to the job itself. And so it's not beneficial, truly beneficial to the workers. It probably benefits lazier workers, less creative, less workers who are less inclined to retrain or improve their training, improve their resume to get a better job, right? So the union system is geared towards people who are happy with the same old day in and day out for 30 years. But some people are just not able to live that kind of life, right? There's no reward, there's no sense of satisfaction, of a job well done, because those same union workers resist innovation, improvement, uh, you know, doing things better, right? It just there's no incentive to do that, and so it's not a real protection for workers. Now, in contrast to May Day. commemorating workers is Victims of Communism Day by Ilya Somin, right? So there's an article, Victims of Communism Day, from 2021 by a gentleman named Ilya Somin. And it sounds like his family has ties with the Eastern Bloc or Russia itself. And so no surprise that he would write something like this. And in that short article, he quotes from the quote, Black Book of Communism, Crimes, Terror, Repression. And that came out in 1999. And in that book, it is said that 80 to 100 million people are dead because of all of the communist movements in the 20th century. And he says that this is greater than all 20th century tyrannies combined, right? That would be Hitler's uh, tyrannies, right? That would be those, all those, um, you know, uh, the result of Hitler and World War II. Well, the number of people who are killed as a result of communism is much, much higher. And so the book, the Black Book of Communism, basically looks at generally the communist regimes of the country, Russia, that is the Soviet Union, communist China, the Great Leap Forward, and all of that. And all of this was done in the name of the worker, right? 100 million people die in the name of the worker to make things better for the worker. And we know by now that when you try to have a movement that favors a small group of people, a minority within the larger society, you need control. You need to be able to control the entire society. And so communist dreams of utopia always devolve into dystopia, where people are starving, you can't get anything, there is no freedom, you're not allowed to think, you're not allowed to talk, you're not allowed to say anything which is not approved by the people in power. And as I mentioned before, that this whole pro workers' rights movement is fundamentally hypocritical, right? Because you're not, and this is why the Knights of Labor failed, because they had competing interests. And so you might have a strike in one place, but then it negatively affects a group of workers who are doing something else. And they're not interested in participating in that strike, but they are adversely affected by that strike. And so therefore, it's very tough to get all workers to unite all of the time. Uh, so it's hypocritical. Um, and as I always say, hypocrisy is the root of all injustice. And so if your entire government is all about hypocrisy, then what it does through the authoritarian control, it magnifies government incompetence and results in starvation, especially of the vulnerable, children, and prison for any dissidents, right? People who try to fight against or vocally disagree with the government. It doesn't even mean that you're violent. It's just you're just saying stuff and then you get locked up. The reality is that government and people who are in government, I don't care how smart people think they are or how they think they are, they cannot know what is best and most efficient for everyone, right? All they know is what they know. They don't know all of the individual, unique situations which are especially harmed by the policies which they have determined, which they have declared is the most important for the country, right? And so the more authoritarian the government is, the more idiotic, the more incompetent they will seem because they think they're speaking for everyone, but in reality, they are only speaking for a small group of people. And when we think about the Pentagon budget, it's a boondoggle for a small minority of people in the United States. I mean, how many Americans are involved in weapons manufacturing? Not that many. And you can't eat bombs. So, how does that even improve the quality of life here in the United States? It does not. And so, this whole hullabaloo about workers' rights is fundamentally unjust, right? The free market does more to protect the worker than unions do because the free market protects everyone, all workers, unlike communism, which can only help a small subset of workers sometimes, right? Because you got to meet the needs of all the different powerful unions. And so you have to take them in turn so that the hypocrisy and the contradiction and the competing interests, the conflicting interests don't show up right away. Now, I once upon a time had a Chinese student from mainland China. He started following me around, and so one day I asked him, I just read an article, and it wasn't the Little Black Book, right? It was a different article. I can't find it now, but it said that a more accurate number of people who died in China during the Great Leap Forward of Mao Zedong in the 1950s and 60s, I guess, was 100 million, right? So it's the high end of the Little Black Book of Communism for all communist regimes. And so this group of authors, they looked at records from towns and whatnot, and they estimate more that China alone had 100 million dead as a result of the Great Leap Forward. And so I asked him, I said, "Hey, so does that number seem a little bit high to you?" And he looked at me without missing a beat. He said, "It's way too low." And I was horrified, and so was everyone else in the room. And I said, why do you think that?" And he said that his grandfather was a policeman, and his main job was to dispose all of the bodies of the people who died as a result of the starvation caused by the Great Leap Forward. And he said in that small town, you know, it was off the charts, the number. He didn't give a number, but he was busy every day. And so people of his grandfather's generation uh, laugh at the number of 100 million. It's much way north of that, which is actually a horrifying thought. But instead of celebrating May Day, workers' rights, because clearly is problematic, and instead of having a Victims of Communism Day, Peter Schiff suggests why not have Entrepreneurs Day, right? Because workers work for people who have a business. And these people who have a business idea, they risk a lot, time, money, future, all of this energy, their family even, they risk all of it to have a business, right? Because in order to start a business, you need to get loans. And what do you use for collateral in order to get the loans? Some people use their houses, some people use any other property that they own as an individual, and they put it up, right? And they risk it for their business idea. What is their business idea? Well, it's an idea that they hope will address the needs of other people enough that he'd be able to make a living from it, right? So businesses inherently are problem solving endeavors, right? Oh, how do we get food to the people in inner city? Oh, I'll start a bodega. I'll start a small little grocery to be able to provide food to people within walking distance, right? And so basically, entrepreneurs are problem solvers. Okay. And so why not have a day that celebrates people who strive to solve the problems of society? Okay. So if the business doesn't do well, right, then who suffers? Who loses everything? Well, that would be the entrepreneur, right? What have workers done except do the work that the entrepreneur could do, but they don't, right? Because there's more important things that need to be done, which other workers cannot do, right? The entrepreneur has to do more skilled, important things for the business that the average worker has absolutely no clue as to what to do, right? How to run a business meeting, how to meet investors, how to, do the paperwork, all of that stuff. The average worker has no clue. And so to say that workers should share in the profits is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. And the nail that seals the coffin on that argument is that entrepreneurs only get paid if there's money, if there's a profit, right? Workers always get paid first. Otherwise, you can't keep your workers, right? So the workers always get paid. Usually, entrepreneurs do not until the business starts to take off. And if the business goes under, then the entrepreneur loses everything. Workers don't have to give back their wages, right? There's no risk for the worker other than not taking a job with another company. The risk belongs all to the entrepreneurs. And so that's why a lot of people cannot take the plunge and start a business. There's a lot of risk involved, right? Which is why the rewards should be higher for the entrepreneurs. However, unfortunately, because we live in a world of protected government protected monopolies and regulations which squeeze out small businesses, that's why you have salaries of CEOs which are way too high and the workers are still squeezed, yet in the global market are overpaid, right? They're overpaid, and we know because they are not competitive on the world market, right? You know, being paid well is a subjective thing, right? Uh, no one ever says I'm paid too much. Well, I always used to say that, but that's because I knew what I should actually be getting, that I'm overpaid. Other people would be willing to do what I did for a lot less, which means that I'm overpaid. So people in America are always used to complaining about, uh, their salary that they believe they deserve more. But compared to the rest of the world, yeah, we're overpaid. And so, again, we have to remember that it's about freedom. Everyone needs freedom, freedom to be able to change your jobs as you wish, freedom to start a business if you wish. Uh, no one chooses to be poor. And so we have to be able to trust that every person may make a lot of mistakes, but they'll learn from their mistakes and ultimately make choices that work in their favor, right? Uh, you can knowingly choose a profession which doesn't pay much. But even if you take a job of lower salary, it just means that your lifestyle is more modest, right? You live within your means. And that doesn't mean that you're living in poverty. You can still have a roof over your head, food on the table, clothes to wear, right? It doesn't mean you have to be in poverty. It doesn't mean that you need welfare. It just means your lifestyle, right? Your house is smaller. Your clothes are more bargain brand. You don't eat out at all. Like in my family, we cut each other's hair, right? We rarely eat at a restaurant, right? Because it's so much more expensive. And so you learn how to try to live within your means. It doesn't mean that you are living in poverty as the stereotypical impression of poverty might be. And so freedom in the marketplace means that workers can be paid what they are worth. And if the worker doesn't think they're paid what they are worth, they can look for something better. And if they don't think that anyone will pay them what they are worth, then they can start their own business. This keeps everyone honest. It keeps workers working hard. It keeps entrepreneurs always looking for the best talent and rewarding that talent. So there it is. May Day for workers' rights, or Victims of Communism Day, or Entrepreneurs Day, right? Three different subjective perspectives on the same concept. Something to think about for May Day, and I will talk to you next time.